because the world is where it is today, it's not like it was even 10, 15 years ago. We've got information at our fingertips. When you first realize how you're feeling inside and it's negative, go online and search, why am I feeling this way? What's going on? And get as much information as you can about it, right? Who can help me with this, right? And then just start reaching out. But you gotta take those steps. The biggest part about all of this is taking the steps, and that's the hardest thing for people to do, especially like me when they're stuck. But you got to understand, when the pain supersedes the sitting there and not doing anything, that's when we will become motivated to move.
Hello, Rodney. Thank you for doing this.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate being here.
You're my first person back. Now that I'm back at doing podcasting more myself, and because of the title of the podcast, I want to start with a question that I feel I'll be really curious to hear about people's answers to. What is something that at some point felt impossible for you and now is your normal, or something that is just possible?
Wow. The one thing that I can say, well, first, let me say this. I've always been a very, very determined individual. And I've always felt that there was nothing that I couldn't accomplish. And this goes back to being told when I first stepped into the corporate world that my goal of becoming a VP was too lofty, right? And fighting through that, and eventually, within that same company, being promoted 14 times in 12 years until I reached the director level over their most complicated office of employees. So that's the determination piece. But I fell into a situation where I didn't realize that I had something going on with me from a trauma standpoint, from a adverse childhood experience standpoint, that didn't manifest until later on in my life. And that was dealing with the situation that I grew up with my father being an alcoholic and being abusive, violent personality. And this is where I got a lot of traits from my father. I didn't want to be like him, so I did kind of just the opposite. And what I did not realize is that all of my motivation and all my drive came from trying to prove something to him. I am what you call a rejection overcomer. So because I was, rejected a lot, I felt like by my dad, that was my drive. That was my motivation, to be successful in the corporate world, to be successful in the education field, to be successful in everything that I set out to do. But when he passed, that's when I fell into this depression state, this mode. And it didn't come on all at once. It was over a period of months, weeks, years, and I couldn't shake this thing. And that was the hardest thing in my life to deal with. For about 7 years, I was just wandering around, not really being fulfilled in the jobs that I was taking. I had become excessively overweight. I was really in this depressive state. What I needed to do was find my purpose. And so there were 3 things that kind of came together just this year, within a month of April 2024. And that was the pastor whose church I was attending. It was a new church, first church I've ever joined in my life. I've always gone to church, and I've always been very spiritual, always prayed every day, several times a day, actually. But I never really joined a church because that's not something that my parents really practiced when we were children growing up. So it was a church. It was a therapist that I was seeing a therapist. And then it was this company that I had become a member of called the Purpose Company. And I joined their program called Purpose Mastery, where they help you find your purpose. So those three things came together, and they were pretty much all saying the same thing in different ways. And it was basically what your father did to you was not done to you, it was done for you. See, all of my accomplishments and everything that drive that I have and the adaptability, you know, all of those things that made me who I am came out of that adverse experience. And when I flipped the switch in my brain to realize that my father, although it was done in a kind of a not so good way, a painful way, but it helped to teach me certain principles and values that made me who I am. That was the hardest thing to overcome because it played with the mind. And prior to that period, I used to tell people, oh, just get over it. Oh, just do this. Oh, just have to drive. Oh, you can do it. You can accomplish. I don't understand why this is so difficult. When I fell into that state, I did not understand what was going on. But not only did I feel isolated, because I would explain to people what was going on with me and they didn't understand it because they were like, you just snap out of it. And it wasn't that easy. It wasn't that simple. There were no solutions. And that's one of the things that made it really, really difficult is that the people around you really didn't understand. You know, and the therapist that I got in January, it took her like 3 months to kind of, you know, like I said, it was April when all of this stuff started to come together, to really get me to realize, you know, that your father did so much for you that you don't realize, you know. And just to give you an example, you know, I've gone, you know, 35 years in the corporate world, leading individuals in a management capacity, I would say. And I never treated anyone with a lack of dignity and respect. And the reason that I did not do that is because my father was so disrespectful growing up. And I know how that made me feel. And so my therapist said to me, she said, hey, you realize you know, look at all the positive people. You've touched thousands of people over the years, you know, in a positive light. You realize you got that from your father. And it was almost like a light switching, you know. And so when I finally got to a point where as I forgave him, I was able to forgive myself. And now I look at the world totally different. The world to me now is that two things are always paramount: people and circumstances. So situations are going to happen because of people and circumstances. And you can either look at it from a positive standpoint, optimistic standpoint, or you can look at it from a negative or depressing standpoint. I choose to look at whatever that situation is. I may not have the understanding at that moment because that's not God's plan for me to understand at that moment. But optimistically, positively, I know there's some good in it somewhere. And I will find it. I will search until I find it because that's how I look at the world now. And since then, remarkable things have been happening in my life. So I know that was kind of long-winded, but just wanted to share that.
So there's a lot for us to unpack here. And first thing that I wanted to ask you is, so you said that you always have been determined. Yeah. And when you had this situation about setting this goal and you have a person telling you that, let's be more realistic. So in that situation, do you know what was it in you that didn't just listen and accept? Because there's like two ways that we can go about it. And it really depends on the personality and things like that. And you had quite rough background as well. So there can be like trauma that can affect that thinking where it might be like, oh, maybe I can't kind of do it, you know? Do you know what was it in your mindset or where you were at that time that made you to not listen to that or not to accept that, especially coming from somebody who was an authority that should know that, oh, this actually might be too extreme goal for you?
I know exactly what it was. It's exactly what I said a few moments ago. It was my father.
Mm.
See, being a rejection overcomer, you shy away from rejection, right? And so in that, you will operate in one of three ways. You will either fight it, meet it head on, okay? You will either stick your head in the sand and do nothing at all and pretend it doesn't exist, or you will run away from it. And those were my three mechanisms, which are mechanisms for everyone, okay? Well, the one thing that my dad instilled into us is to fight. When something goes against your values, when something goes against who you are, you fight it, okay? And see, when I and this makes me emotional because I can still picture the face today of that individual sitting across the conference table and pulling out my goals on a piece of paper and saying, you know, you might want to choose something that's a little more realistic, you know. But she didn't understand what was in my heart. She didn't understand what was burning, you know, and what was burning in the pit of my stomach was essentially, you don't know me. You don't know where I come from. You don't know what I'm capable of. You don't know my background. What gives you the right to tell me what I can and cannot do? I'm not accepting that. I am not accepting that. Now, what I did ended up saying to that person was, you asked me to write my goals down on that piece of paper. And that's exactly what I did. Respectfully, you do is whatever as though you feel as though you need to do with that piece of paper, but you'll never ever get me to change one single word on it. Now, can I finish making my sales and go back to my desk? And that's exactly what happened.
That's a really, how old were you?
18.
That's a really strong, like, ability to, in some ways, stand up for yourself at that age, when a lot of times we are questioning who I am, what I'm about. But you had this, like, I'm not changing anything on that paper, and I'm gonna go and make it happen. And that's where also I had a question about, even as you were speaking, I was thinking about the importance of support, which is one of the C's that you mentioned in another conversation that I was listening to. So can you talk a bit more on support? Because that's something that I feel, as much as we are connected right now, we are becoming more and more disconnected in some ways. And that's where, like, even in myself with a lot of things, a lot of times when I would go and pursue certain goals, I would a lot of times feel like I'm alone in it. But I also had the issue with asking for help or support. But now in, like, let's say with the half Ironman preparation, I would have several people like supporting me. I had some people even like come to the spot to be here and show me like signs and everything as I was like racing. And that was one of the experiences where I understood how important that is, because even though it was really painful experience, like just racing for like 7.5 hours, those people made it fun. They made it enjoyable. They made it probably less painful than it might have been otherwise. And I can feel strong power in, and I have always been the supportive person, always there for others, always supporting. But I think I understood it more when I started to receive it, especially when it's not, there's no conditions on it. There's no, I'm going to help you because it's in my interest or because there's some kind of reason behind it. Can you talk a bit more on the importance of support and maybe what it has meant in your life and in your journey?
Well, that's just it. The support actually came in directly from my father. Even though it wasn't a conversation with him, it was that fight that he put in me that prompted me to say, I don't need to talk to anyone. I don't need to seek counsel. I know that you are wrong because you can't possibly know and understand what's in my heart. See, I'm doing this because I don't want to live the life that I lived growing up. And because of that, it pushed me to react in a way where I became somewhat rebellious, but it was a rebellion in a sense that I'm going to prove to you, you know, and, you know, essentially, you know, that same individual watched me get promoted to supervisor, promoted to manager, several levels of management, get promoted to senior manager until I got promoted to director, running my own location with almost 700 employees from over 50 different countries around the world. And I can't say that I blame her. So I don't want anyone listening to this to feel bad or upset or anything like that, because you have to understand the person that you are looking at and listening to today is not the person I was back then. Okay. I was a product out of the hip hop culture. I didn't dress professional, didn't have the professional wardrobe, didn't articulate the way that I do today, didn't have the vocabulary that I do today. I talked with a lot of colloquialisms. And all of these things I needed to work on to develop myself. So what she was seeing was what was on the outside. So I can't say that I blame her for, going that route, other than the fact that that's really not how you develop people, right? I think it was someone that said something profound, and that is, if you look at a man as he is on the outside, he can't get any better. But if you look at a man on the inside as what he can become, he can be great. And that kind of, was one of the things that I learned later on down the line, after having gone through that experience. So that support came indirectly. Now, this is not to say that throughout my life, I didn't have, I've taken martial arts. I started when I was 8 years old. That was the one connection that I had with my dad, my older brother, is that we were all into martial arts. When it came to that, because of his violent personality, he loved to fight. So, martial arts was really big with him. My brother and I joined when I was 8 and he was 9. And then after about a month, my father came to one of our tournaments and saw us competing and loved it so much, so he joined. So the three of us have always been in martial arts in that sense. So I've had martial arts instructors, I've had coaches, I play sports, I've had coaches. So I've had individuals in my life that did things to feed me, to teach me about leadership. And this is one of the reasons why when I stepped into the corporate world at a very early age, I ascended up the ladder very rapidly into management, because I had a lot of, like, for example, at the age of 12, 11, I was teaching karate classes for my sensei. Okay, so I was accustomed to leadership. I was groomed that way. But I also had this determination in me that was given to me because I was determined to not live my life like I had saw growing up.
So if you had to boil down your success in your career, because it's quite impressive, to like 3 things, what would be like the 3 keys that you would say that those are the 3 things that, I'm sure there's way more, but just to simplify it, that you would say that these definitely played huge role in me getting that like rapid improvement?
Number 1 is paramount. It's mindset. And the mindset is essentially what I gave a speech on at District HR Madison last week. My title was From Trauma to Triumph. And so your mindset has to be set in a certain way. Well, let me give you the 3 first, and then I'll elaborate on each one. Mindset, I would say, is number 1. Number 2, you have to have clarity. And number 3, you have to have community. Okay, so now I'll talk about each of them: mindset, clarity, and community. Mindset is essentially you have to put yourself in a position where you're not going to give up no matter what. And the way that you do that is you find what you call your worth it factor. Like, why is this worth it for me? What am I doing this for? See, if that supervisor would have understood, if she would have asked one question, what are you doing this for? Like, why? And she would have listened and said, because I grew up in a household where, you got your electricity cut off at times. You got your heat cut off in the wintertime at times. You experience certain things, and I don't want to live like that ever. And so if she would have asked those type of questions, she would have understood the level of my determination on why. But see, we never went down that road. So it was a mindset thing, right? So your mindset has to be in the right way. The second thing that I would say is, it is the community. And this is where you talked about having support. You have to surround yourself with people that are 3 to 5 steps ahead of you and people that are 3 to 5 steps behind you. And this is something that I practice in my business today. I've got coaches, I'm a part of membership groups in 3 different areas of my business. And that is because I understand that the people that are 3 to 5 steps ahead of me in certain areas, they can give me insight within that membership group. The people that are 3 to 5 steps behind me, the reason that they are important is because I can give them insight in certain areas. And when I do that, they provide me with something that's very powerful. It's called fulfillment. And that's them coming back and saying, thank you for that. Oh, I did this and it worked. That builds your confidence towards what you're doing. So you can't just have people that are ahead of you coaching you and not give back. When you take your gifts and you give back, you get fulfillment. It builds your confidence so that you can move forward with the things that the people that are 3 to 5 steps ahead giving you. This is why community and congregation is so supportive. Like my church, the individuals that are there, they're so supportive. They help me in different ways. And it's not just, understanding the word of God, but it's also, what am I doing in my business? There was a Bible study class last week that we attended, my wife and I, and one of the elder deacons was sitting at the table with us, and afterwards he came up to me and he said, you understand that message was for you. He said, I'm telling you, move your business forward, push your business like crazy. You have to do this. And I had no idea that this guy even knew anything about my business. So that community is important, right? And then the third thing is you have to have that clarity. Because if you're not clear on where you're going or what you're doing, then it becomes easy to remove you from the steps that you need to take to accomplish what you're looking to accomplish. There's, I went through a training session once, and they said that when people feel anxiety, stressed out over a situation or something, even if it's, they got to pay a bill and they don't have the money for it, it's 99% of the time it's because they don't have a plan. They don't have a plan, and that's why they're stressed out and they have anxiety. As soon as you develop a plan, all of the stress and anxiety is not going to go away, but most of it will, because now in your mind, you have something to execute at. And then once you start taking steps in that area, it starts to build your confidence slowly. So let's say I don't have the money to pay this bill and I'm stressed out, I'm upset over it, I don't know what to do. I can wallow in that and panic, or I can take a piece of paper out and say, okay, what are my solutions? What can I do? Can I sell something really quick? Can I pawn something really quick? Who can I borrow from really quick? Can I take a day job doing something really quick? And I write those things down, right? Now, let's say I got 1 or 2 things in each area. Now I've got a plan. And guess what? That stress, that anxiety, it'll start to subside once you put that stuff on paper. The next step is just start to execute it. And if the pain is great enough, that's what causes us to move. That's what causes us to execute in that situation. There's a story that I was once told. There's a dog that's sitting on a porch with an old man in a rocking chair. And the dog is just moaning and groaning, just in pain, right? And so this gentleman walks by and he asks the old man, he says, why is that dog moaning like that? And the old man says, because he's lying on a nail. And the guy says, well, why don't he just get up? And the old man says, I guess it just isn't hurting him bad enough. See, once the pain hurts bad enough, then we are enticed to do something about it. But having a plan, having clarity, let's say the dog is landing on that nail, but the dog sees in the corner of the porch, there's a bed pillow for a dog. Oh, wow, it's more comfortable for me to go sit over there or lie over there. What is it going to take for me to get up and walk over there and sit on that pillow?
There's 2 questions that I have within this. first one, I feel like you kind of already answered with this example, because the first question was kind of what to do when that pain is kind of paralyzing you. But in some ways, I feel like the pain is just not big enough. But the follow-up question there, and you can answer this if you have something to add there. The follow-up question also is there something that can be done to avoid getting to that point where that pain is so hard that you have to take action and start to take action earlier?
You know, it's interesting you say that, Austria, because that's exactly how can I put it? That's exactly the conversation that I'm having with certain individuals who are searching for their purpose and searching for their meaning. Because I'm explaining to them that if you don't find it now, and you're on the beginning stages, you're in the beginning stages of becoming depressed if you don't find it, right? And what I'm trying to do is prevent them from happening to me, happening to them. So what happened to me is I was searching, didn't really know what I was going through, didn't really understand it, and was getting more and more depressed. That led to overeating, that led to a huge weight gain, that led to sleep apnea, that led to congestive heart failure, that led to high blood pressure, that led to pre-diabetic. All of these ailments was caused from a mental state of mind. And that happens when you don't have that clarity, right? So what I'm saying is, I'm looking at individuals that was where I was when I knew I didn't want to go back and work in the corporate world. I wasn't getting fulfillment. I know what that was at the beginning, but I didn't understand it. I didn't understand that I was a rejection overcomer, right? I didn't understand how to deal with that. I didn't understand what my strengths were with that and how to get fulfillment from that. I didn't understand what my weaknesses were with that and how to deal with those. And so what I'm saying to you is that when you first start to get signs or symptoms or an internal feeling of a certain way, that's when you need to take action. And taking action is essentially dealing with your mindset, getting that clarity, and finding a community that can support you. Did that clarify your question a little bit more?
Yeah. And I will dissect this more. Because I feel like a lot of times with these topics, it's like, oh, ABC. But then when you go to the reality, it's like, oh, easier said than done. So
Yes.
what would you say would be a good place for somebody to start with, starting to build these like 3 pillars up?
The first thing is the community. Like I know I talked about mindset, right? And you got to change your mindset, but it's tough to do when you're in isolation and you're by yourself. Okay. So you have to find people that can build you up, that can help you in that particular area. Okay. That community is important because they can also help you with the clarity piece of it. Okay. Once you have the community, people that can support you and people that you can support, right? Now you're getting more clarity with yourself. Okay. And then that leads to taking steps towards what you need to do from a mental standpoint to move and propel you forward. But you gotta find the right people. And you know, for so many times in so many areas, there are people out there that claim to have the tools and techniques to help, but they don't. And I'll give you an example. I've been seeing a therapist for several years. I had been seeing a therapist for almost 2 years. And in the month of December of last year, we had a conversation and I said, this just really isn't helping. I don't understand what's going on with me. I still feel stuck, right? Like I not want to do anything. I'm not inspired. I'm not motivated. Nothing is fulfilling me. What's going on? And I said, the one thing that I do notice is that every time I watch a television show or have a conversation of something that deals with what I went through in my childhood, I get emotional. It all goes back to my father, but we're not spending any time in that area. So this just isn't working. And so she said, okay. So then we ended up doing an exercise. Now, mind you, we're almost 2 years into this. She did an exercise, and we started touching on stuff with my father, and she saw how deep and how emotional I had gotten because of what was inside. And she recommended to me, she said, you know, Rodney, I think it's probably best if you find another therapist to work with. Now, no offense to any different cultures or anything like that, but she happened to be an Asian female who did not experience what I had experienced growing up being a Black male. And she said to me, you may want to, you know, look at like an African-American male as a therapist and maybe try and find someone who had gone through what you went through. And so she said, I'm going to stay with you and I'll still continue to see you until you find someone, but that's probably going to be best for you. And so I started searching, and in the month of January, I found a Black female who had gone through situations like me growing up. And in our first session, I could tell she was the one. Because what she took me through and what she helped me to understand about myself was profound. And this is something that I hadn't gotten in almost 2 years from the other individual. Now, no offense, and that individual is great as probably helping people in other areas. But in my area, I needed someone to help me that understood growing up in a Black family, what it's like to have the pressures that you have put on you in the United States, to understand that my father was treated a certain way and didn't have certain things as a child, to get me to look at and picture my father as a little boy, not getting what he needed and being abused. And that is why he didn't have the capacity to lead our family the way that I felt like it should be led. See, she couldn't understand that, but this new therapist could. And this is why it's so important that you find the individuals that can help you for your situation.
Follow-up question here would be, how, first of all, what are some of the things that, let's say, a person listening can think on to try to identify, even before they go and look out for that support, what is it that I'm actually looking for? Because I feel like, to your point about clarity, that could be really helpful to know what is it that I actually feel like I need help or support with, or what kind of person or something along those lines. And then maybe what would be some of the first steps that they can take in actually looking for that support? Because it sounds super simple, but it actually can be hard.
Yeah. I would say this, because the world is where it is today, it's not like it was even 10, 15 years ago. We've got information at our fingertips. When you first realize how you're feeling inside and it's negative, go online and search, why am I feeling this way? What's going on? And get as much information as you can about it, right? Who can help me with this, right? And then just start reaching out. But you gotta take those steps. The biggest part about all of this is taking the steps, and that's the hardest thing for people to do, especially like me when they're stuck. But you got to understand, when the pain supersedes the sitting there and not doing anything, that's when we will become motivated to move. And my perspective on this is just to say, when you first feel it, start to take action, start to move. Because like in my case, if I would have done this 7 years ago, right, I would have never reached the stages of depression that I ended up, and feeling stuck that I ended up getting to, right? And the longer you wait, the harder it is, because the more depressed you come, the more stuck you feel. So when you first get those signs and symptoms in your head and your mind, start researching, because at that point you're still able to move. You're still able to like seek, and the motivation is still a little bit there, right? But if you wait too long to where you're just wallowing in it, that's when it's really, really difficult. So at the
Yeah.
first sign of these feelings of, I'm not feeling so well about this or about that, you know, and I'm not talking about physical, I'm talking about mental. You know, the physical stuff is easy because you know physical pain, right? You go to the doctors, they give you medication, they give you, you know, they tell you how to fix it and all of that. The problem with mental is that you almost have to go through the fire. You have to go through the pain to get to what we call the other side. And there's not much of a painkiller that you can utilize when it's mental, unlike getting a painkiller when it's something physical. When it's a physical ailment, you can usually get a painkiller. But when it's mental, you got to go through that fire. And that's what keeps people immobilized. That's what keeps them from moving. So I would say when you first start to feel those things, start to research online, figure out what you know what it is that's making you feel that way, who you can reach out to, who you can talk to, who you can connect with. That would be my advice.
And I think another thing that I can add to it is I feel like a lot of times when we start to make that change, we kind of expect to feel differently, or we expect to feel better, but a lot of times it will not feel good. And don't be surprised or think that that's the wrong decision if it doesn't feel good. Because that, and I know from my experience when I go through certain like transitions that I know that it's good for me, but it doesn't feel good because
Right.
there's like a lot of inner fight that is happening. And even like with that, another thing that I think can be identified to get clarity on like maybe I am now starting to get to where I want or might need some support is if you try to maybe like use something to suppress emotions, whether it's like watching TV or reading or alcohol or anything like that, that there usually are some signs that if we try to step aside and look from the side, there is something that we can notice that is like changing or shifting. But I wanted to talk a bit more about going through the pain, because that's something that I feel like it's inevitable in life, sadly, or luckily, because there's a lot that can come from it. Can you talk a bit more on that? Because you literally in the introduction, when you were introducing yourself or you were answering the first question, you mentioned that you went through this like really hard period for 7 years, but that was only like a few seconds that we heard about it. But living through those 7 years, that's a different story.
Yeah. Let me say this. In 2015, we buried my father. I ended up getting married. I ended up getting divorced within that same year. And this is someone who I had known for 14 years. We had dated many, many years. I lost 2 relatives. I lost a close friend. I got laid off from my executive job. All of this happened in 2015. And that's when my world kind of was thrown into this turmoil. And that all of that rejection in 1 year is what caused me to spiral. And ironically, it didn't happen. It happened subtle. And this is where I want people to really be careful. I didn't just get depressed by all of this stuff because everything was happening all at once, right? And just fell into this depressive state. No, it was kind of really slow over a period of time. I just knew inside I didn't really want to take another corporate job. I was trying to fight at that time to save my marriage. And so with that, it wasn't that all of a sudden I'm just this big ball of mess, you know, crying every day. And no, I was still functioning. But I knew something wasn't right inside. I knew I had felt different, like something was broke. But what I didn't realize is that had always been inside of me. It just manifested because of all the rejection I faced in 2015. But the core of it circled all the way back to that rejection piece from my father and losing my drive, my motivation, because when he passed, there was nothing else more for me to prove. I lived my life being determined at everything that I did because I wanted to prove something to him. And then when he passed, there was nothing else left for me to prove. And see, that's why, you know, motivation is temporary. That's why I needed to find my purpose, because finding my purpose, that's not temporary. Now I know what I've always done, what I've always felt from my past. I can execute that in my present, and I can affect the outcome of my future by executing in the present, because I know me now. Being a rejection overcomer, being a strategist, being a injustice equalizer, and being a truth teller. Those are the 4 pillars that makes up my purpose. Go ahead.
Go ahead. No, I had like next question.
There are titles to all 4 of these things. Being a rejection overcomer, that's kind of my origin story, right? That's how I've made decisions all my life. You know, usually it's some traumatic event that happens with you that causes you to make decisions a certain way. And that's me. That's my origin story, is being a rejection overcomer. Okay. My natural ability is that I'm a truth teller. I always seek the truth. I always tell the truth. I admire and respect people the most when they're truthful. I do not admire people when they're untruthful. That's a very high value of mine. That's just who I am, a truth teller, right? My acquired skills is that I am a strategist. I look at things really quickly, put them together, and come up with a solution like that. And that comes from being in a household with a parent that you don't want to make upset. So you watch, you learn, you observe, and you respond accordingly quickly. And you've done this all your life since you were a child. So of course, when I got to the corporate world, I saw things, I watched, I learned quickly, and I responded appropriately. And that's what helped me to propel. That's the strategy part that I got from my father, right? And then the last one is what you call your pull passion. Not just passion, because the definition of passion is a barely uncontrollable emotion, but you want something that's pulling you towards it constantly. And for me, I fall in the category of injustice equalizer, meaning that I always want to see things fair for people. I'm always taking up for people that are at a disadvantage. You know, and it's funny because understanding this now about me, I look back at my childhood, I look back at my teenage years, I look back at the corporate world, and I looked at how I've supported people and have done many, many things because I wanted to see things fair and equitable, right? So understanding those 4 things about me now, I understand my purpose. I understand who I am and what I am and what I need to pursue constantly. So I'm not relying on going through that painful stuff of, you know, now that my father is gone, that I don't need that as motivation anymore to move forward and propel me forward.
So what was it in that year? Because you didn't have this clarity then.
No.
What was it in that year where you literally experienced so many traumatic experiences that some people might not even experience in a lifetime? What was it that got you through?
Wow. I have to say one thing, God, you know, spirituality. I had 3 individuals who, you know, one of them was one of my employees actually that worked for me at the time. I had 2 other individuals that one was an employee from 25 years ago that reached out and said, "Hey, you saw me on social media. You don't look the same. What's going on?" And I hadn't spoken to her probably in like 15 years. And then I had another individual that was a pastor who was a childhood friend that I went to school with, grade school with early on, and kind of the same thing. And as I was going through my divorce, they were, you know, kind of counseling me and giving me feedback and moving on, um, how I needed to just understand why sometimes we are put in situations like this. And the biggest thing for me, Austria, is just that I couldn't see it at the time, but I know now that where God was moving me, that wasn't the person that needed to be connected with me. And it's not that she's a bad person. It's not that she did anything bad. It's not that I look at her in a bad way. I do not. It's just that her values and my values were not aligned. And so God knew that. And God basically was saying, if you want to manifest your abilities, then you're going to have to do two things. Number one, you're going to have to go through this pain. And number two, you're going to have to understand that this isn't the person that you need to be connected with. Because see, here's the interesting part. We both were executives. People looked at us as a power couple. We were traveling the world. We were doing all of this fabulous stuff. I mean, you know, and what was on the outside, what people saw, was not what was going on the inside. See, I had a vision and she had a vision, but we didn't have a vision together at the top. And so what we ended up having was division. Mm-hmm. And when it finally manifested to its core, that's when, you know, she was just like, you know, I feel like we need to go in different directions. And I'm like, what? Like, we just got married like 5 months ago. What are you talking about? You know, I didn't see it coming. But we weren't aligned, you know? And so in my mind now, God knew that, right? And that's kind of what I went through. But one of those individuals that I was speaking with, one of those three individuals said to me that, you know, when God is preparing you, you're going to have to go through the fire, but you're also going to deal with greater, and she used the term demons. And she said, so you have to prepare for that. But she said, don't worry. She said, God is going to send you someone, and this person is going to be by your side and support you like you can't imagine. And that is my wife today. See, because when I went through that experience, I had decided that, God, I'm not choosing any more females. I'm not, you know, I'm getting this all wrong. I was choosing females based off of my love language, physical touch. But that's not what I needed in my life to support me. I needed someone that was convicted in their values, that was extremely loyal, because I'm a highly convicted, highly loyal type of individual. And so if we're not aligned in that way, that's not the person that I need to be with. I needed someone that was going to be really secure and knew that when I gave my word, I do everything I can to try and keep it. And so I set up these pillars of loyalty, affection, transparency, and strength. And if the person didn't have that, then I'm not dating them, I'm not seeing them, I'm not, you know, any of that. And so, and I, you know, went through a period where I didn't date anyone, I didn't see anyone, I wasn't interested in sleeping with anyone, I wasn't interested in doing anything like that. Did I have friends and did we hang? Yes. But no. And there were people that approached and, oh no, he's available now. No. And it wasn't until going to a conference out in San Diego and meeting this young lady. We spoke for about less than 2 minutes at the end of the conference. 3-day conference. First time I saw her was at the end. We spoke, and we didn't have any contact for 4 months. And then she saw something I posted on social media about leadership and management. And she reached out and was like, hey, where were you 10 years ago? I could have used this, you know, in this leadership role. And we started having these conversations over the phone. She lived in Houston, Texas. I was living in Atlanta. But we had met 4 months ago in San Diego. And so as we're having these conversations, I started to see, wow, she's extremely loyal. You know, I started to see, wow, she's extremely transparent. And then I started to see, wow, she's not insecure at all. She's got the strength of like any female that I could ever imagine. I couldn't see the affection because we were, miles apart, living in two different cities. And so we spoke on the phone for about another 4 months. And then finally she said, I want to come see you. And of course, my divorce was finalized and all of that. And she came to see me, and we had the most remarkable time. And at the time, I was thinking about going back to China. I had been to China twice, different locations. And I said, "Hey, you want to go to China?" And she said, "Yeah." I didn't expect her to say yes. So a couple months later, we're vacationing in China and had the most beautiful time. And I can tell you this: we had to fly to San Francisco, and from San Francisco to Shanghai is about a 10.5 hour flight. When you get on a 10.5 hour flight and it feels like 10 minutes, you know you're with the right person. And we spent 10 days, and it was just amazing, with this individual. And to this day, again, she is everything to me. But it was that one individual, my employee from 25 years ago, that said to me in a prophetic kind of way, "She's coming. She's coming. Don't worry." Whew. And it makes me emotional to this day when I think about all that she has done since then to support me.
I have a question here that is slightly more spiritual, because you said that God helped you to go through that year.
Mm-hmm.
Have you, as you were going through that, did you feel that you were being led, or that you had some kind of, that God was trying to communicate to you, or something that helped you to go through that? As you mentioned that God was the main thing that helped you to get through that year.
I didn't know at the time.
Okay.
I just know I was in constant prayer. And I kept praying and praying and praying for my marriage to work, to help me to figure this out. What is this, God? Is this, I need to stand stronger beside her? Is this a test? Or do I need to walk away? And then after a period, I was seeing a different therapist at the time because I was living in Atlanta, and she was kind of helping me through this period. And it was more or less, my prayers started to change over a period of time from help this to work out to help me to understand, give me discernment of what's going on. Then it transpired to a third stage of, if she's not the one, then fine, remove her and let me move on. And so those were the prayers towards the end that I was having. And which led me, I ended up going to a conference and ended up meeting, my wife today.
And also with what you said, that you didn't see it coming, the divorce. Do you have any advice or tips for somebody who's going through something, or something in life happens, which is probably going to happen, knowing the way the life works, that you didn't see it coming?
I do. And that's why transparency is a big thing with me. Here's what happened. If you're transparent, you can get through anything, with your significant other. And it might be really painful. It might be really scary to be transparent at times, but you have to do it. You have to do it because it gives that person a piece of security that they will always know that you will open up and talk to them. You won't shut them out, right? And so when I was going to this other therapist, going through my divorce, she said to me, she said, "You know what, Rodney?" She said, "There are individuals and couples who have situations far worse than yours, but they make it." And then she said, "There are individuals who have some that are not as nearly as bad as yours that don't make it." She said, "Do you know what the difference is?" And I said, "No." She said, "It's transparency." She said, "When you can talk about anything to that person, no matter what it is, no matter how deep it is, you can get through anything." And so that's why transparency became one of my pillars. And so I will say to the viewers, transparency is the key. If we had transparency in that marriage, things would have been different. I might not have spent 13 and a half years dating this person, And we were both busy. We were both executives working for different companies, living in two different cities, actually two different countries. But that clarity would have come long ago if we had the type of transparency. And I'll be honest, like, I didn't make that easy. I'll take a full accountability. I didn't make it easy to be transparent with me at times, and so that was something that I had to recognize and work on, that I'm, working on with, constantly working on, in this marriage. Because one of the things that I will say, we are who we are. And that means that our gifts that we have to help people can also be utilized as a detriment to hurt people. But we have to realize that. And so it was a clip in a Marvel movie, Doctor Strange. I don't know if you've seen it. I'm a huge Marvel fan, and collected comic books when I was a kid. And in this movie, the Ancient One, who was training Doctor Strange, she has this profound statement, and it gave me chills when I was sitting in the movie theater watching it. She said, "We can never get rid of our demons, but we can learn to live above them." And so she was teaching him that you have to learn to live above that part of you. Take the good and utilize it to continue to help people. But the bad part of it, learn to live above it. And that's my lifelong practice, because I'll never get rid of certain things that are about me that makes me so passionate, and certain things that help me connect with people so well. But at the same time, if I'm not careful, those same abilities can be utilized to hurt people that are close to me.
How do you practice it?
Oh gosh. Something that I created back when I was going through the divorce. I call it PRT123. I knew I needed to communicate better. And I figured I had worked in the corporate world for so many years. I had designed and developed training curriculums and taught them and had mad success. So it was like, okay, you're a smart guy. Create something for yourself. And so I created this PRT123 theory. The P stands for when you are triggered, because that's when it happens, when you're triggered, right? When you're triggered by someone or a situation, the P stands for pause. The R stands to respond, but you got to do it with grace and gander. And the T stands for take accountability for whatever it is. So if you responded negatively, bad, or sarcastic, or whatever the case may be, then you need to hold yourself accountable for that. If you responded with grace and gander in a very good way, then reward yourself for that, right? That's the PRT piece of it. The 1, 2, 3 is how we communicate during that grace and gander, okay? The 1 stands for what we communicate. See, we all, when we're in a heated moment, especially when we're triggered, when we're in an argument or whatever the case may be, we all want to do number 1. We want to get our point out, our message out. We want to tell them what we think. What we must practice more than anything is step 2. And that is how we go about doing it. The how is more important than the what. And then the third step is, did they take the information? So it's number 1, what we communicate. 2, how we communicate it. 3, did they take the information? Because if I'm very, very careful and very sensitive to how I communicate what I need to communicate, then the chances of them taking the information has a much greater impact for success. And so it's PRT 1, 2, 3. Pause, respond with grace and gander, take accountability, communicate. How you communicate, do they take what you communicate? PRT 1, 2, 3. That's how. And I've been practicing that since. I've taught it to family members who are dealing with difficult situations. I've taught it to colleagues and friends, and they're all saying it works. I know it does.
It does, and it also makes sense, and it's simple enough to. And also, if it doesn't work, it's probably a lack of practice, because like everything, it's about practicing it. It probably won't work the first try.
Yep. Yep.
Because you might you get triggered, you respond, and you instantly kind of miss out on the pause. But then you can go back, you can reflect.
Yeah, let me share a little bit about the pause.
Okay.
That pause can be as long as you want it to be or as short as you want it to be. Sometimes my pauses are a second. Sometimes my pause is a couple of days. Until I can respond, until I feel like I can respond with grace and gander, that pause needs to be there. It needs to be there.
What needs to
Because
happen during that pause?
What's that?
What needs to happen during that pause? How do you know that you're now ready?
You got to work through such situations in your brain. And here's an example. In meeting with, this really, I'll just say great therapist that I'm working with now. She got me to see something that I was doing that wasn't good, but I didn't realize it. And that is, I sometimes would get affected by something my wife would do because of my triggers, but that's not what my wife meant. And so the behavior of my wife at times would trigger me, but it's because of that trigger that I would take it totally different. And it wasn't what she meant. Right. And so because of that, I have to recognize now, okay, now it teaches me, okay, well, you got to pause. Because if in some of those instances, I pause long enough and then I realize, wow, that's not even what she meant. Gosh, I feel dumb inside. I feel stupid for being even upset about that. Now I can go back and respond with grace and gander. Like, I'll give you an example. Sometimes, my wife being, my business partner as well. And she coaches me in a lot of areas. We coach each other in a lot of areas. And sometimes when she's communicating to me, because of my trigger, I take it as rejection. But I had to learn that it wasn't rejection, it was a redirection. See, she's in her mind redirecting me because she wants the best out of me, right? But because of my triggers, I would take it as rejection. Now that pause have allowed me to sometimes play this over, what happened or whatever, and then we'll have conversations about something else, and then she'll say something, and I'm like, oh, wow, she didn't even mean it the way that I initially thought. And, when I discovered that, the difference between rejection and redirection, I actually went to her in an emotional state and I apologized. Because there were many, many times when I know she was redirecting me, but I saw it as rejection.
It's something that triggers are such a great opportunity for growth, and it's really easy to oversee them as that, especially when we are in the moment and our defenses just automatically start to activate. It's something that, have you experienced it where, let's say, it's something that I do a lot now, but there was a lot of ego work and shame work probably, or guilt work that I had to do to get to that place where if I get triggered by something that somebody said, depending on the person, usually it's more so people that I'm like more close to, I can literally tell them like, okay, what you just said, it actually triggered me. So I talk through that and I try to, even like in myself, try to understand what exactly triggered me. But it's more so like, to your point, so what you're saying is that it's not their fault. It's just something that they said, or it's not even what they said. It might be the way they said it or something. It can be one word that they said.
Yeah.
It can be as ridiculous as that.
It's funny. It's funny you mentioned that. I didn't mean to cut you off, but it's funny you say that because for me, a lot of times it's how you say it. And that's because my father had this harsh tone all the time. And so when something is said in an aggressive way, sometimes it triggers me. So you're right. But it's understanding, you got to understand what your triggers are first and foremost. That's a better way of dealing with it. But you know, when you get upset about certain things, you know, because someone said something or someone did something, you know, it's a trigger inside, you know, but it's how we
Yeah.
respond to those triggers. Yeah.
And every trigger is, I think that the more we work on ourselves and we practice it, the more those triggers are, for me, I look at them as like I'm unwrapping the gift. It's like, oh, what do I need to work on this thing? what is
That's a good
hidden
way to look at
there?
it.
Yeah, but there was a time that I was like pointing fingers or,
Uh-huh.
you know, like trying or feeling like a victim, or being
Mhm.
hurt, which I still probably feel like that when I'm getting triggered, but
Mhm.
I'm able to step aside and I'm being like, okay, it hurts, but what's the gift here?
Yeah.
Let's look at the gift as well.
Yeah.
um, and I also wanted to ask you, because we talked a lot about rejection.
Mhm.
What does rejection mean to you now compared to before?
Uh, it's a work in progress, to be honest with you. I am still triggered. I can tell you that and share that with you. Not as much in certain instances. Um, I understand it better. Let me just say that. I understand it better, and I understand that I need to operate in a mindset where I cannot be fearful of the rejection, because that was my problem. You're fearful of the rejection, so you react in one of three ways. You fight, stick your head in the sand, or you run. Okay. And now I understand when that rejection is being presented to me, and I take steps towards the plan or the operational process that I initially started out at before the rejection came to me. Okay. Uh, I'll give you an example. Let's say I'm a salesperson and I don't like to deal with rejection. It's going to be kind of difficult because you get a lot of rejection in sales, right? And so I go to work for this company because it's an excellent opportunity. The salary is great. I love the people we're working with. But then I go out on my first quote unquote sales call to meet with someone. Okay. So now, although I put myself in that situation and I know what I need to do, I'm really, really fearful of meeting with this prospect to try and sell them because I'm fearful that I'm going to be rejected. But what I have to do is I have to continue to take steps. I have to make sure that that I still attend that meeting. I have to make sure that I still listen to them and see what their needs are, what their concerns are, and kind of internalize how my product or service can suit their needs, right? I still have to walk through all those steps, even though in my mind I'm thinking, well, what if I'm rejected? Because I have to get to a place of, so what? They're not telling you no. They're just saying they don't know enough about what you have to offer and how it can help them. There's a difference between NO and KNOW, even though they sound the same. And so in my mind, because I'm a rejection overcomer from a sales perspective, I look at it as they're not telling me no, they're telling me no. Not NO, KNOW. They don't know enough about how I can help them. You know, it's kind of like dealing with like individuals that I coach and clients. I see some people that I know, and I'm using the word NO in this case. I know that I'm sorry, KNOW. I know I can help them with their situation, but it's like that dog laying on a nail. It's not painful enough for them. They don't see that they could be making way more money in their job, that they can get promoted and elevated if they were willing to invest in my program. And I see that, you know, in a lot of individuals. Now, some of them take advantage of it. Some of them are at the point where it's painful enough to where they say, okay, I need help. And they invest, you know, in the program. And some of them just see it. They just say, hey, I want more. I want to learn more. I want to grow. So I think you can help, right, in that particular way. And so it's just a difference between N-O and K-N-O-W. Yeah.
I feel like
For that,
there's a
yeah.
I feel like there's a lot of parallels that can be drawn with failure in this example as well, because as you were talking, I wrote down that to take steps anyways, even if you're might be like being rejected or something, but a lot of times with rejection, I feel like with failure, it's similar where let's say with following with that salesperson example, if that person knew that prospect gonna say yes, they're gonna approach it and they'll be happy about it and they'll be confident. But similar to failure, we have this sense that we actually don't know if they're gonna say yes or no, if they're gonna reject or not reject, if we're gonna succeed or not to succeed. And it's kind of stepping into that unknown with that belief, or it's something that I have been thinking, or like even like within myself, internalizing a lot about, because there's so many uncertainties, especially when you start to change something or you take new steps or new direction. A lot of times what is stopping us from doing it is not having that certainty of, oh, once I make this decision, it will succeed, or actually know that down the line, this is the right decision, 100%. I feel ready. I know. It's kind of that we don't have that clear sense of this is the decision. Not always, but a lot of times that might be the case, especially when we're still exploring who we are, what we're about. And I feel like that's something that for me, a lot of times would get in my way of actually taking any action, because unless I had certainty that it will lead to success, which I can't, because I can't predict future, not yet at least, then I wouldn't even take the step to start with. Do you have any maybe advice when it comes to dealing with that uncertainty that comes with so many things in life?
I do. Before we talk about uncertainty, let's talk about failure.
Okay.
I don't believe in failure at all. I tell people we don't fail, we fall. Okay. The key is to fall forward so that you can learn from that situation. Failure to me is when something is absolute. It's complete. It's not. It's forever. That's just
Yeah.
that's not until you leave this earth. Regardless of what you have gone through, what have you happened to you, whatever, right? You still have an opportunity as long as you're taking breath, right? To affect the outcome of that situation or any other situation. We see it all the time where people are incarcerated for years and years and years and years because of something they've done. And is that a failure or is it a fall? They fail, but then maybe being incarcerated for years and years and years and years, they've impacted like hundreds, thousands of people that have come in through the prison system from a positive standpoint. Okay, so when you look at it from that standpoint, to me, it's not failure. It's they're falling, they fell. Okay, and it's just a matter of picking yourself back up and rerouting and looking at it a different way. Now, having explained the failure piece, let me talk about the uncertainty. If we understand that we can't fail, we can only fall, but then we can dust ourselves off and come back at it a different way. It helps the mind into thinking that from an uncertain standpoint, it may not turn out the way that I wanted it to turn out, but I can still affect it. Think about the individuals who have created some of our most profound inventions throughout history, the history of this planet. And how many times, I'm not going to say they failed, but how many times they will fall while working on that experiment to get that thing to where it is. When that happens, they had to have a certain level of confidence and that certainty. And then I'll say this: the mind does play tricks on us, but we can play tricks back on the mind.
Mm.
And my philosophy is to play tricks back on the mind. It's kind of like I am, because of my spirituality, I have this what I call this word. It's more of a phrase, and it comes from Romans 8:1 in the Bible. And I got it from Dr. Joyce Myers, who is a pretty famous pastor here in the U.S. in her book. And she said that, you know, when you're faced with situations, you know, with the demon, there's like this saying that you can say to break it. And that is, I will not walk towards the flesh, I will walk towards the spirit. I will not move towards the flesh, I will move toward the spirit. I will not run towards the flesh, I will run towards the spirit. Now, whenever I'm in a painful situation, let's say I'm at the gym working out and I'm running, you know, on the treadmill, and it's painful, and I just start saying that. I just start saying that. I'm not moving towards the flesh, I'm moving towards the spirit. So now I'm internalizing that the pain is just the body part of it, but I'm connected with the mind, and the mind can push me further and further and further. Okay. And so I utilize that statement in a lot of areas in my life. A lot of times throughout the day, I will say that saying, you know, that I'm not going to walk towards the flesh, I'm going to walk towards the spirit. You know, the last thing I'll leave you with in that area of uncertainty is this: there's something that's called the waterfall technique, right? Or cycle, waterfall cycle. We can see rain falling from the sky, right? And we can see clouds up in the air that holds moisture, that drops the rain, right? But what we cannot see is evaporation. We can't see the water going up to the clouds, but we know it happens, right? Now, we might see a puddle of water on the ground and we can see it disappear, right? But we don't see it going up. And so when you think about those three things, rain, clouds, and evaporation, we only see two. But we know it exists. And this is where I say the mind plays tricks on us, but we can play tricks on the mind. Okay? Something very simple also. It's easier to accomplish something when you count down versus counting up. When I'm, you know, lifting, exercising, and, you know, you're counting upwards, 1, 2, 3 to get to 10. It's easier if it's 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5. You know, there's a technique that someone said when it's something that I can't remember the name of the author behind this, and I apologize for that. But it is said that when there's something that you don't want to do and you're trying to motivate yourself and push yourself to do it, count down like they do a rocket ship and just blast off and go and do it. 5, okay, when I get to 1, I'm doing it. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go. And that has an impactful kind of impact on, you know, you getting motivated at that moment to go and do it, right? And so I will say that about dealing with the uncertainty piece. Sometimes it's not what you can see, but it's over a period of time. You know, like, for example, when I first started going through my situation with the therapist and my divorce and all of that, I could not see the other side at all. And that's why it was so painful and so hurtful, because I didn't realize it was working. I'll give you another example that kind of relates to that. I remember tearing my rotator cuff from snowboarding. And it was one of the most painful surgeries I've ever had in my life. Had 4 surgeries in my life. That was, you know, the most painful, I would say. And the rehabilitation started like 10 days or something like that after the surgery, where they got to get in and you got to move your arm and twist it and turn it. And you're in so much pain because you don't want the scar tissue to get hard and tighten up, you know. And I got to tell you, it was probably 2 months into it, I was still in so much pain and did not feel like it was ever going to get better. I mean, that's how bad it was, the rehabilitation part. But eventually it did. you know, and I couldn't see it at that moment. And that's the same way when we have seen other people accomplish something, we've seen other people get through something. People are watching this video and this podcast, and they're seeing that, okay, Rodney got through this. You got to know that it might not feel like it's working, but just like that water moving up to the sky in the clouds, it's working behind the scenes. And that's what you have to hold on to. Even though there might not be any signs, it's working. You just gotta stick with it. You need that consistency, right? And that's why I say community and clarity helps you with consistency. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, I'm listening here and being like, this is gold. This is. I have last two questions before I let you go. First one, I heard in one interview that a person asked you a question, but I will make it slightly different. So you were asked a question like, what has childhood taught you? But my question would be, what has your childhood taught you about you?
Wow. I know so much more now. My childhood taught me that I know today, did not know then, that I am a rejection overcomer. I didn't know that when I was going through it. My childhood taught me, because of that, being of a rejection overcomer, that my strengths, very determined individual, a strategist that I spoke about a little earlier, that I'm very adaptable, that I can look at situations and adapt my situation to make it work, that I can teach other people these things because it's immersed within me, so deep. It also taught me that on the opposite end, or the not so good end, is that I'm a people pleaser. And that's where I have to be careful of being taken advantage of. So while there are strengths, there are also weaknesses. But these are just, I noticed today, and all of this stuff came from being a rejection overcomer, which is what I went through in my childhood. So I will say that that's what it taught me more so than anything, that I understand today who I am and what I am because of what I went through during my childhood.
All right, then. And last question is, what is the impossible that you're chasing now?
The impossible that I'm chasing now, I talked a little bit earlier about having a quote unquote worth it factor. Like what is it? What makes it worth it to you? And when I look at me being a strategist, me being an injustice equalizer, me being a truth teller, and me being a rejection overcomer, these all things make up my purpose. And so because of that, my worth it factor is I do not like seeing followers being led by unsavory and disrespectful leaders. And because of that, my passion is to continue to teach and to educate people on this thing that I call magnetic leadership. And that magnetic leadership piece is essentially everyone in the leadership position, whether they're a parent, because as a parent, you're in the leadership position as well. Every leadership position, they're seeking influence. And sometimes they're given that influence just because they have the title. To me, that doesn't make you an effective leader. Okay? In order to understand that influence piece of it and to have a greater impact, there are two pillars that sits as a foundational core under that influence. Number one, it is your values. And number two, it is building loyalty. So if you put your values out on the forefront and let people see what your values are, right? Then you're able to build loyalty with people that can connect with your values. Those people will be influenced by your actions. So it's values, loyalty, influence. And this is something that I'm teaching and moving forward. In fact, launching a membership group called Opulence Leadership with that. And this is going to be a safe space for anyone that's in a management leadership position. Again, it can be anywhere as a parent. For anyone that's in a leadership position or management position, this will be a safe space where you can come and ask the difficult questions to get answers from an expert. You know, for my background, I think I've got over, 34 years in management, 23 as a corporate executive. And I've helped thousands of individuals working for corporations. And now it's time for me to take this out to the masses and help more people. This is my calling. This is my purpose. I don't want to see bad leaders continue to lead in bad ways because they're uninformed. And I don't want to see new leaders being developed in bad ways because they're not getting the development. And so this Opulence membership group will be a monthly membership where you can come in. We'll have 3 calls a month. 2 calls will be catered towards just asking questions and getting answers. And then the 3rd call will be something developmental that I'm going to deliver every single month, something impactful to help the group of individuals. And then outside of that, people that want to spend more time with me, that want to get coaching individually, I offer that as well. I have 2 tiers to coach individuals with that as well. And then I'm also available for keynote speaking for corporate events.
Where can people learn more about or reach out to you?
Oh, simple. Magnetic Leadership. Text the word magnet, MAGNET, to 55444. The word magnet. Text magnet, MAGNET, to 55444. You type that word, you'll be a part of my network. I'll reach out to you. We'll connect. You'll get all of the information on what I got going on. For example, I'm speaking at a TEDx event in November the 2nd. I'm speaking at TEDx Greenhouse. And my speech is going to be centered around those values in leadership as well. So
I love that. Well, thank you for coming. This was great conversation. I can't wait to share it with people.